When All Quiet on the Western Front premiered in 1930, audiences weren't prepared for what they witnessed. Lewis Milestone's adaptation didn't just show war, it thrust viewers into the mud, blood, and madness of the trenches with a visceral intensity that left many stunned into silence. The film's revolutionary approach began with Milestone's casting decisions. Rather than relying solely on Hollywood actors, he recruited actual World War I veterans to fill the ranks of his on-screen army. It is said that these men brought an authenticity that no amount of method acting could replicate. Their weathered faces and instinctive movements under simulated fire reportedly created an unsettling realism that made audiences forget they were watching a movie. But it was the film's groundbreaking use of sound that truly separated it from anything that came before. 1930 marked the dawn of the talkie era, and Milestone seized this new technology to assault viewers' senses. The constant barrage of artillery shells, the rat-a-tat-tat of machine guns, and the agonized screams of wounded soldiers created an audio landscape so immersive that, according to some accounts, theater-goers reportedly ducked in their seats during battle sequences. The psychological toll depicted on screen proved equally revolutionary. Shell shock, what we now understand as PTSD, wasn't merely referenced, but shown in all its devastating reality. Characters didn't just mention trauma. They embodied it through trembling hands, vacant stares, and sudden breakdowns that shattered any romantic notions about warfare. This unflinching honesty sparked immediate controversy. Several countries banned the film outright, while veterans groups organized protests outside theaters. Some critics argued that the movie's crime wasn't inaccuracy, it was telling the truth too well. Many believe Milestone had created something unprecedented, a war film that made audiences question whether any cause was worth such human devastation. Konichikawa's Fires on the Plain transformed Shohei Uka's harrowing novel into cinema's most unforgiving portrait of war's dehumanizing power. The 1959 Japanese masterpiece followed defeated Imperial Army soldiers stumbling through the Philippine jungle, their bodies wasting away as their minds fractured under the weight of abandonment and desperation. Uka's source material carried devastating authenticity. The author had lived through the Philippine campaign's final collapse, witnessing firsthand how starvation could transform disciplined soldiers into scavenging animals. His novel documented the systematic breakdown of military order, social bonds, and basic human decency when survival became the only remaining imperative. Ichikawa recognized that this raw testimony demanded equally uncompromising cinematic treatment. The production's visual approach mirrored documentary footage more than traditional narrative cinema. Ichikawa employed handheld cameras and natural lighting to capture the jungle's oppressive atmosphere, while his actors endured genuine physical hardship during shooting. The resulting performances carried an exhausted authenticity that makeup and acting technique alone could never achieve. What separated Fires on the Plain from conventional war epics was its relentless focus on individual degradation rather than collective heroism. While other pictures depicted soldiers fighting for causes or comrades, Ichikawa's characters fought only against their own extinction. The work stripped away every romantic notion about warfare, revealing instead a primal struggle where cannibalism became a logical survival strategy rather than an unthinkable taboo. Critics initially struggled to categorize the movie's brutal honesty. Some dismissed it as gratuitously nihilistic, while others recognized its power as an anti-war statement that transcended national boundaries. The picture's international festival success proved that audiences worldwide could recognize universal truths about human nature when civilization's restraints finally collapsed. Ichikawa had created something unprecedented, a war narrative that offered no heroes, no redemption, and no comfort beyond the simple fact that some stories demand telling regardless of their darkness. Stanley Kubrick's Paths of Glory wielded cinema's most devastating weapon against military authority, the unblinking camera that refused to look away from institutional murder disguised as discipline. The 1957 masterpiece transformed World War I's French trenches into a courtroom where viewers became unwilling jurors, forced to witness how armies devour their own soldiers as readily as they sacrifice them to enemy fire. Kubrick's revolutionary tracking shots through the muddy labyrinth created a visual language that trapped audiences within the soldier's nightmare. These extended sequences, following officers as they navigate the zigzagging passages, eliminated the comfortable distance that traditional war films maintain between viewers and combatants. The camera became another soldier, stumbling through the mire while shells exploded overhead, making escape impossible for anyone watching. French authorities banned the film for nearly 2 decades, recognizing that Kubrick had exposed something more dangerous than enemy propaganda, the arbitrary nature of military justice itself. The story's 3 soldiers, executed for cowardice after an impossible assault fails, represented thousands of men who died not from German bullets, but from their own commander's need for scapegoats. This wasn't battlefield heroism gone wrong. This was systematic betrayal of the men who trusted their leaders with their lives. Kirk Douglas's Colonel Dax embodied the moral agony of officers caught between conscience and command structure. His futile defense of the condemned soldiers highlighted how individual integrity becomes meaningless within systems designed to prioritize institutional preservation over human life. Douglas's performance captured the suffocating reality that even principled resistance often amounts to nothing more than noble gestures in the face of predetermined outcomes. Critics immediately grasped that Kubrick had created something unprecedented, a war film that declared war itself the enemy, rather than any particular nation or ideology. The director's refusal to provide redemptive moments or patriotic consolation left audiences confronting an uncomfortable truth, that the greatest threat to soldiers often comes from the very institutions they serve. Bernhard Wickey's The Bridge drew its devastating power from a documented tragedy that unfolded during Nazi Germany's final, desperate weeks. The 1959 production adapted Manfred Greger's novel, itself based on actual events, where teenage boys were conscripted to defend strategically meaningless positions while seasoned Wehrmacht units retreated toward Berlin. These weren't hardened soldiers facing their mortality. They were children playing war until war decided to play back. Wickey's direction emphasized the grotesque mismatch between the boys' romantic notions of combat and the chaotic reality that awaited them. The teenagers approached their assignment with schoolyard enthusiasm, viewing bridge defense as an adventure rather than a death sentence. Their naive excitement transforms into bewildered terror as American tanks roll toward their hastily constructed positions, turning their heroic fantasies into a nightmare of smoke, screaming metal, and sudden death. The movie's climactic battle sequence became legendary for its unflinching portrayal of violence as messy, random, and utterly without glory. Unlike choreographed Hollywood firefights, Wickey's combat scenes captured war's essential chaos, bullets striking without warning, explosions disorienting rather than dramatic, death arriving through accident as often as enemy action. The teenagers' military training proves woefully inadequate against experienced American forces, creating a massacre disguised as a battle. German audiences responded with profound emotional impact that transcended typical cinema reactions. The work arrived during a period when West Germany was grappling with its wartime legacy, offering a narrative that depicted German youth as victims rather than perpetrators. This perspective allowed viewers to process collective trauma while confronting war's fundamental absurdity, the waste of young lives for objectives that military commanders had already abandoned. Wickey's masterpiece established itself as post-war German cinema's definitive anti-war statement, proving that the most powerful condemnations of violence often emerge from examining its impact on those least equipped to understand its true cost. Masaki Kobayashi's The Human Condition trilogy stands as one of cinema's most exhaustive examinations of war's capacity to corrupt even the most principled individuals. Spanning 9 hours across 3 pictures released between 1959 and 1961, this Japanese epic followed idealistic pacifist Kaji through forced labor camps, military conscription, and Soviet captivity, each environment systematically dismantling his moral convictions through relentless brutality. Kobayashi's own wartime service in Manchuria provided the trilogy with devastating authenticity that extended far beyond surface details. Having witnessed firsthand the dehumanizing machinery of imperial expansion, the director infused every scene with personal knowledge of how institutional violence transforms both perpetrators and victims. His camera lingered on moments of moral compromise that other filmmakers might have glossed over: the gradual acceptance of cruelty as necessity, the erosion of compassion under survival pressure, the way good intentions become meaningless when confronted with systematic oppression. The trilogy's unflinching depiction of starvation, torture, and psychological breakdown shocked audiences accustomed to more sanitized war narratives. Kobayashi refused to provide redemptive moments or heroic gestures that might soften his indictment of militarism's inherent corruption. Instead, he constructed a methodical catalog of how war reduces human beings to their most desperate impulses, stripping away civilized behavior layer by layer until only survival instincts remain. Japanese censors initially pressured Kobayashi to moderate his critique of imperial military culture, fearing the works might undermine national reconciliation efforts. The director's refusal to compromise resulted in limited domestic distribution, though international critics immediately recognized the trilogy's unprecedented scope and moral courage. Scholars now regard The Human Condition as perhaps the most comprehensive anti-war statement ever committed to screen, a work that demonstrated how individual conscience becomes meaningless when confronted with institutional evil designed to exploit human weakness rather than elevate human potential. Samuel Fuller's The Steel Helmet blazed onto screens in 1951 as America's first cinematic glimpse into the Korean conflict, delivering a punch that left audiences reeling. Fuller, who had earned a Bronze Star and a Purple Heart during World War II, channeled his combat experience into a production that cost just $104,000, yet packed more raw authenticity than works with 10 times the budget. The movie's racial dynamic shocked viewers accustomed to sanitized war pictures. Fuller cast James Edwards, an African-American actor, as Corporal Thompson, then forced audiences to witness the bigotry that poisoned military units from within. One scene depicted a white soldier hurling racial slurs at Thompson, while both men faced enemy fire, a moment that distributors initially demanded be cut, but Fuller stubbornly preserved. More disturbing still were the picture's casual depictions of summary executions and prisoner abuse. When a captured North Korean soldier taunts an American about racial segregation back home, the response comes swift and brutal. A rifle butt to the head that silences the propaganda, but raises uncomfortable questions about American moral authority. These moments reflected Fuller's belief that war stripped away civilized pretenses, revealing humanity's darkest impulses. The Pentagon's reaction was swift and harsh. Military officials condemned the work for portraying American soldiers as undisciplined and brutal, arguing that such depictions undermined troop morale and recruitment efforts. Some critics accused Fuller of creating anti-American propaganda disguised as entertainment, while others praised his courage in showing war's unglamorous reality. Gene Evans, who played the grizzled Sergeant Zack, later recalled how Fuller insisted on shooting in actual combat gear salvaged from recent battles. The helmets bore real dents and scratches, the uniforms carried authentic stains, and the weapons showed genuine wear, details that created an atmosphere of lived-in authenticity that Hollywood's costume departments couldn't replicate. Robert Aldrich's attack emerged from the shadows of documented leadership failures that plagued American forces during World War II. The 1956 production drew inspiration from actual incidents where incompetent officers sent men to their deaths through cowardice, poor judgment, or outright negligence. Stories that, according to some, military brass preferred to keep buried. Aldrich refused to sanitize these uncomfortable truths. His screenplay exposed the rot that could fester within command structures, showing how fear and ego transformed officers into liabilities rather than leaders. The movie's central conflict, a cowardly captain who abandons his men while a tormented lieutenant struggles with impossible orders, presented a situation reminiscent of cases that military tribunals reportedly handled behind closed doors. Jack Palance's portrayal of Lieutenant Costa became the work's emotional anchor, delivering a performance that critics described as volcanic in its intensity. Palance channeled the psychological fractures that combat could create, showing a man caught between duty and survival, honor and self-preservation. His character's internal war proved as devastating as any external battle, with every scene revealing new layers of trauma and moral conflict. The movie's unflinching examination of military hierarchy sparked fierce debate among veterans and critics. Some praised Aldrich's courage in depicting American forces as fallible human beings rather than propaganda heroes. Others condemned the picture for undermining public confidence in military leadership during the Cold War's tense early years. Legends suggest that Pentagon officials attempted to discourage the work's distribution, fearing it would damage recruitment efforts and morale. Whether true or not, Attack certainly challenged audiences to confront war's moral complexities without the comfort of clear heroes and villains. The result was a brutal meditation on how extreme circumstances could reveal both the best and worst aspects of human nature, leaving viewers to grapple with questions that had no easy answers. David Lean's The Bridge on the River Kwai forced its cast to endure the same tropical hell that broke Allied prisoners of war, with temperatures soaring past 100 degrees Fahrenheit in Ceylon's unforgiving jungles. The director's obsession with authenticity meant actors collapsed from heat exhaustion while filming scenes that depicted the systematic brutalization of captured soldiers, creating a production environment where the line between performance and genuine suffering became disturbingly thin. Alec Guinness's Colonel Nicholson embodied the film's most psychologically complex element, a military officer whose rigid adherence to duty transforms into collaboration with his captors, illustrating how prolonged captivity can warp even the strongest moral compass. Nicholson's pride in constructing a superior bridge for his Japanese captors represents the ultimate psychological victory of imprisonment, where survival instincts override patriotic loyalty and professional soldiers become unwitting tools of enemy strategy. This character study revealed how captivity could break minds more effectively than bodies. The film's climactic bridge explosion utilized genuine dynamite charges that obliterated the actual wooden structure built specifically for destruction, creating a sequence of devastating realism that audiences felt in their bones. Lean's refusal to rely on miniatures or studio trickery meant the thunderous collapse captured on film represented tons of timber and steel genuinely disintegrating under controlled explosions, generating authentic shockwaves that enhanced the scene's visceral impact. Beyond its epic scope, The Bridge on the River Kwai distinguished itself through unflinching depictions of forced labor that reduced proud military officers to skeletal figures driven by basic survival instincts. The film's portrayal of prisoners constructing infrastructure for their enemies, while slowly dying from malnutrition and disease, created one of cinema's most honest examinations of how warfare's true horror often occurred far from battlefields. Frank Wisbar's Stalingrad Dogs Do You Want to Live Forever emerged from 1959 Germany as one of cinema's most unforgiving examinations of military catastrophe from the losing side's perspective. The film is widely regarded for its devastating authenticity, though the extent of direct veteran involvement in its creation remains undocumented in available sources. What distinguishes this production is its unflinching approach to depicting the Wehrmacht's experience during the encirclement that trapped 300,000 German soldiers in Stalingrad's ruins. Critics have noted that Wisbar's production design creates suffocating spaces that appear to deliberately mirror the psychological claustrophobia experienced by the encircled Sixth Army. These cramped interiors create what many viewers describe as spatial anxiety, while the film's relentless pacing denies audiences the breathing room typically found in conventional war pictures. The technique generates an atmosphere where escape feels impossible, a sensation that reportedly haunted actual survivors of the Stalingrad pocket. The film's most brutal sequences depict the documented reality of starvation and frostbite that claim more German lives than Soviet bullets, showing soldiers reduced to scavenging frozen corpses for scraps of clothing and food. These scenes reflect historical records of temperatures dropping to minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit, conditions that turned simple wounds into death sentences and transformed disciplined units into desperate collections of individual survivors seeking any means of staying alive. Analysts recognize that Stalingrad rejected the heroic narratives that dominated war cinema, instead presenting conflict as a grinding machine that consumed human dignity alongside human life. The film's anti-heroic stance distinguished it from contemporaneous war movies that sought redemptive meaning in military sacrifice, establishing what many consider a template for German cinema's ongoing examination of Wehrmacht mythology. If you've enjoyed this video, please leave a like and comment. Also consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell to get notified of our new videos each week. Thanks for watching.